Hey everybody, JJ Cooper, Geoff Pontes. We apologize. We are a day later than normal with the Prospect Podcast and YouTube show, but that's for a reason, which is spent all yesterday working on getting posted the top 30 prospects. We've updated the top 100, and now we have farm system rankings for all 30 teams. And we didn't want to not talk about that this week. And we didn't want to post that before we had all that up at the site. So now if you go to baseballamerica.com, you can check out all the updates, top 100, top 30s, farm system rankings. And Geoff, it feels like there's a little bit of relief on my end. There's a little bit of relief on your end. And there's a lot of sleep that needs to happen now, I think, to catch up. We're
Yeah.
doing this. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a crazy 6-week period between all the updates and the draft and futures game and the trade deadline, and we kind of sprinkle in some additional stuff like complex coverage, depending, it's mostly Josh doing that. Cape Cod League, there's just kind of so many things going on, so many balls in the air once we finally get to July, and it just kills you.
And please understand, everyone, this is not a complaint, but I will tell you, as someone who does this year in, year out, the relief that comes when the trade deadline passes and you realize that you won't be like at 12:15 going to bed and then realize that you're going to be up to 1:30 because a trade just came through. It's that's some part of August that I really do enjoy. And I know that they've talked about moving the trade deadline back, and if they do, we'll deal. But I do like that part of it. But we want to talk about prospects today, as we do always on the Prospect Podcast. I think we should start. We're going to talk really about the farm system rankings today, and we're going to talk about some of the teams kind of at the top, in the middle, and at the bottom. But I do think that we should start by noting we did also update the top 100. This is all tied to a top 100 update that we did. And I think with that, the key thing that we did with that is we made a point, I would say a little bit of a recalibration. There are guys who were added at the back. Some guys came back in who we bumped out for the draftees, and we added the draftees. And then we're like, you know what? We need to have this guy back in. And then there was also guys who I would say we added in because we keep getting positive feedback, especially Class A guys, complex league guys like that. But the other thing that we did is at the very top of the list, Geoff, I think one of the things that we wanted to do was recalibrate a little bit. We realized that after our last update, we were really heavy on very promising prospects, but prospects who predominantly have not passed that AA, AAA test. And we still have a number of those here at the top of the list, but we did kind of JJ Wetherholt, Samuel Basayo come on down and move up some here, especially I would say Wetherholt, who moved up, I would say more significantly in our list. Wetherholt, has performed AA, now AAA, but that's kind of, I feel like, where we're always doing that balance, but that's that balance of maybe there are some middle infield prospects a little bit higher ceiling than JJ Wetherholt, not by much, but maybe a little bit. But the flip side of it is that there's a little bit less risk with JJ Wetherholt because he's passed those tests, right?
Yeah, I think that's one part of it. Is he's so close to the big leagues. He's been so productive since he's gone up to Memphis. And it has, based on the numbers, it seems like it's been way longer than it has. It's been a little bit over a month. I think it was July 8th. Excuse me. July 8th was his first game with the Redbirds. And another leadoff home run last night. He's got 7 home runs. That was the big kind of question around the profile is, will he be able to make the changes to his swing to get to more of that raw power that we knew that he had? He's made those changes. He started to do that. He sacrificed a little bat to ball ability, but I think that's fine because he's still a good enough hitter that he's not swinging and missing multiple times in an at bat. And he's still not expanding the zone at a rate that's really concerning. I thought Ellie did a really great job this week in the StatCast standouts, kind of diving into a little bit of the changes and what's different about Wetherholt versus the player that we had evaluated as an amateur. And I think they've been good changes. Getting to that impact and expanding, how he can impact a game and the type of hitter he can be. He's not really a 1 or a 2 hitter any longer. Now he's a guy that I think you feel pretty confident in putting in the middle of your lineup. This is a 3-hitter that's going to be able to drive in some runs, and not just with power. He still has the ability to move the ball around, go the other way, move the runner over, and do all those little like respect the game kind of things that has always been prevalent in that profile. That said, I think one of the things that gets underrated, he's an above average to plus runner. You will get those times, especially now that he's a year past that hamstring injury that really hampered him when he was at West Virginia his last year. He's a really good shortstop, probably an above average defender there, because they have Mason Wynn, who's a phenomenal shortstop. He may move over to third base or second base with Arenado, depending upon what his offseason looks like. They're past that $30 million balloon payment in 25. He's a way more movable player now. We'll see if that comes to fruition or not, but he's good enough to fit all around the infield and feel confident. So his skills and his tools aren't that much less loud than Walcott and Made and DeVries, and I think he's actually a very comparable player to DeVries in terms of what you'd like to see from Leo DeVries in the next 2 years. You'd like to see him kind of get to the point that Wetherholt's at. And I think the A's would be tickled if he got to that point. So when all those things are considered, it made a lot of sense to move him up.
Two other things that, as we kind of did some of the reporting for this update, that jumped out to me. One is that with DeVries, speaking of DeVries, who was obviously traded, now A's top prospect, Leo DeVries. But the defensive reports that I got on him were even better than I expected. Like it is something where the reports are, you are talking about not just a surefire shortstop, but an impact defender at shortstop, which that keeps getting better. The offensive performance has been solid, not spectacular. Insert how the Padres push guys so fast where it's hard to evaluate all that. The other one I would say, though, is that of these, Connor Griffin's our number one prospect, and I think we feel very comfortable about that. And Connor Griffin is having, again, Class A, but he was a draftee last year. He's been great at 2 levels. And the biggest question he had coming into the year was the hit tool. And he's hitting, 325, I think, for the year. So again, his performance as a hit tool, the changes he's made all look very impressive. But the other thing that we just keep coming back to with Jesus Made over and over is, if you said, what is Jesus Made's secret sauce, exceptional skill, it's something you wrote about last year when he was in the DSL. Of all the players we are talking about, these Class A middle infielders, and Made's tools, I would say, like, he has bat speed. He has all these others. Like, don't make it sound like we're saying that he's a skills over tools player. He's a yes and skills and tools player.
And he's bigger than you think. He's not tiny.
But his batting eye, his ability to know the strike zone, let's be honest, better than the umpires in Class A that are calling the balls and strikes, is, I would say, 2 standard deviations at least above what you can expect for a good prospect at those levels. That's usually something that kind of comes along later. He's not Juan Soto there. I'm not willing to go that far. Juan Soto, I remember writing about him. Like, I would love to find the Bappers out that we were writing, that I was writing about him when he came up that year. And it's like, this is the closest thing we're going to see to Ted Williams arriving as a teenager, when you talk about that ability to work counts and draw walks and get on base and all that. But Made, okay, I'll put it this way to you, Geoff. Is there anyone you can think of at that age with the other? Because again, there's always some guys who are passive. I would describe as we're not talking about passivity where you just put the bat on your shoulder and you say, I'm going to draw walks in Class A because these pitchers will not be able to throw strikes. Is there a hitter who has that understanding of the strike zone that Made has, where it's aggression, but it's controlled aggression, where he's swinging at pitches in the zone and he's taking pitches out of the zone? I struggle to come up with an elite prospect, an elite 18-year-old prospect who kind of fits that group.
Yeah, I think the age thing is what makes it difficult. His teammate, Luis Pena, probably is somewhere
not as good.
within that group. It's not as good. His angles are a little bit better. I think that's what the big difference is between the two. I'd say he's at least in that conversation. McGonigal is 20 years old. So I would definitely put Kevin McGonigal into that
That's why he's
conversation. But I think once again, the only other guy that's a contemporary from an approach standpoint is probably DeVries, and he expands the zone a little bit more. It's probably a little bit better in terms of bat to ball. The angles are a little bit better. He does not have the thump that Mate has.
But what I would say is and DeVries and Pena really does not have the same. If you look at their chase, if you look at their swings at pitches in the zone versus swings at pitches outside the zone, Mate's at a different level on that. And that's again, we'll see. But that's when you were writing about this when he was in the DSL. It's like it's one of those things where when you see something like that for a player this young who also has bat speed and athleticism and a frame and can play in a middle infield and all these things, that's when it's hard not to get really excited, because that's this tool that can help you unlock all these other things. Because if you have that kind of, combined with bat to ball, and again, I would say some of these other guys may have a little bit better bat to ball skills than Pena does, but you can add to that because you're just spitting on, everything. You're only hitting good pitches.
Yeah. And he's a switch hitter too, which ups the degree of difficulty. I'd say the other guy I'd throw out there, and he's a little older, but they probably have the same number of professional games played as maybe Walker Jenkins. He had an outstanding approach really throughout, the early days of his pro career. It's just, I think Mate has played more games this year than Jenkins has probably played the last 2 or 3.
And unfortunately, a lot of leg injuries, a lot of.
It's changing now, though. Jenkins has been performing, and we're seeing the power showing up. So that's an exciting one to kind of watch up there. And I think he's a guy that's probably going to move back up, in the offseason if he stays healthy the rest of the year.
We have a little breaking news on HelloFresh. We've talked about them for a long time, but this summer they have their biggest menu upgrade yet. Ready for this, Todd Father?
Talk to me.
They have doubled their menu. Doubled. Now you can choose from 100 options each week, including new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world. 100 options per week.
That's incredible. But to start out, what they had before was absolutely perfect. Now to add even more for your go guys like me. I got baseball in the morning. I got baseball afternoon, all day, every day. I need something to get going. I need something to eat, and it's absolutely delicious, Scott.
That's right, Todd Father. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/FT10FM right now to get 10 free meals plus a free item for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on a first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That is HelloFresh.com/FT10FM to get 10 free meals plus a free item for life.
But we also talked about Mate because that's a perfect prep and a segue to our number one farm system is the Milwaukee Brewers. Okay, is there anything that the Brewers aren't doing? The Brewers are the hottest team in baseball, the best team in the National League, best team in baseball, you could argue, and they have the number one farm system in baseball. That's hard to beat. But when we say we always preface snapshot in time. If we did this a month ago, we might have a different number one. If we do it a month from now, we may have a different one. Because let's start with this. When you say, why are the Brewers our number one farm system? The way we do it, we try to do this based on research in a lot of ways, which is there have been multiple people out there going back over 10 to 15 years that looked at kind of prospect valuation. And every single one of those studies that we found makes it very clear that it's not linear. The top prospects are worth significantly more than the next tier of prospects, who are worth significantly more than the next tier of prospects. And the key parts of that, I would say, is those top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 prospects in the game are worth significantly more than the 25th best prospect in the game. And the 25th prospect in the game is worth significantly more than the 100th prospect in the game, because that's where it gets much more muddier, right? If you said but this team we'll get to, like the Mariners have more top 100 prospects, but having 3 guys in that 75 to 100 range is not equal to having 1 guy in the top 5. It's not like a way I'll phrase this to you, Geoff, like is, which it seems counterintuitive, but if you said, okay, if I said, hey, Jesus Mate is available, and I'm going to say, okay, let's just say the Mariners for a second, right? So the Mariners, I say, okay, what about Jesus Mate for Michael Arroyo, Ryan Sloan, Harry Ford, and Gerangelo Cincha? Which that's 4 top 100 prospects. And they're not as valuable as Jesus Mate.
No, I think this even goes back to like fantasy league type of analysis where it's like, you know, I'm not going to, I had someone come to me yesterday, for example. I'm not trading Gunnar Henderson for Corey Seager and Tyler Glasnow, even though those 2 guys down the stretch might provide more points. It's like, no, I want the best player in the deal. And it's the same with prospects. Like Jesus Mate has a significant amount more value, especially when you factor in that all of these guys are controllable and yada, yada, yada. That's at least a discount for a few years. He's the kind of player that you're going to try to get an extension done, a la Roman Anthony, a la Jackson Churio, right? You're probably not going to do that with Ford and Shencha and some of those other guys.
That's another way to look at this, right? Roman Anthony, who was our number 1 prospect in the game, signs an extension that is really understandably below market value. What you give up if you're going to sign an extension during your rookie season, you are understandably saying, I'm giving up the chance to get a Juan Soto contract down the road, which Roman Anthony, if you want to get the truly bust the bank contracts, Roman Anthony was set up to do that. Jackson Churio was set up to do that. Jackson Churio especially. Make your debut as a teenager, and you can hit free agency at an age where very few players ever hit free agency.
Mm-hmm.
However, those players are the ones who get the, like Roman Anthony's deal is going to be, he's going to make well over $100 million no matter what happens for him going forward. And he could make over $200 million. Those contracts, again, to take Michael Arroyo, the top of those guys, top of the guy for top. Michael Arroyo, if he was signing an extension right now, it would be, I would say, more in the look at what the Phillies did a few years ago with, I just blanked on the name of
Scott Kingery.
Scott Kingery, right? That would be the kind of contract you'd be talking about. So,
yeah, I mean, like Ozzie Albies, now granted, this was in 2019.
And Ozzie Albies signed a terrible contract. Let's just,
a 7-year, $35 million contract, and was a better player than I think we think Arroyo is going to be, as flawed as Albies may be. Now granted, it was below market and it was a bad deal, but those are the kind of offers that guys like that are probably going to see.
And so that's what we're saying is that, so if you said, well, why are the Brewers our number 1 farm system? Well, Jesus Mate is our number 3 prospect, and Jacob Mizorowski is our number 4 prospect.
Yeah.
Right there. If you said we're done, they'd be a top 5 system right there. The way we do it. Now, okay, if they only had 2 players in their system, this was an expansion team, and those were the only 2 players we had, we might not rank them top 5, because if all your chips are in on 2 players, that might be a little tough. But what we mean by that is that, and then when you throw in that they have Luis Pena, who, as we mentioned, is one of the best prospects in baseball, just slightly below Pena. I mean, below Mate. Then they have a good system behind that, 6 top 100 prospects. That jumps out. Like it is somewhat top heavy, but there are some interesting guys who are not in the top 100 for them, not in our top 100, who are very intriguing. And I would say also, I'll ask you, but like I kind of factor in a little bit also, the Brewers are a team that has demonstrated time and time again. I'm always going to, when I look at their pitching prospects especially, I'm going to expect them to come closer to their top end outcome than a lot of organizations. And if you said, well, why is that? It's like, because that's what's happened with Chad Patrick and Chad Patrick this year, Tobias Myers last year. We could go through a long list of guys. I mean,
Yeah, and I
Brandon
think
Woodruff,
even
Freddie Peralta, Abner
Mizurowski,
Uribe,
Corbin Burns. I mean, like
Corbin Burns.
there are some names, and they've done it for multiple cycles or generations of this farm system, right? If I've been writing prospects up for 10 years now, we've seen this a lot over the last 10 years.
I left out the best one from this year. The Pirates are like, Quinn Priester, we will trade Quinn Priester for Nick York. The Red Sox, who are pretty good as far as developmentally, had Quinn Priester for a month and a half basically and said, nah, I don't think we're going to be able to fix him either. The Brewers are like, that's fine. We'll take him for Joffrey Rodriguez, and we'll bring him in.
Pick.
And a pick.
And a pick. So that was that. I will say the pick and the money certainly was
okay, but
of
still
some value. It wasn't as bad as the Nick.
I will say right now, the Brewers won the trade because Quinn Priester this year, immediately, without a off season, without a spring training or anything, the Brewers are like, magic wand here. Oh, this is the Quinn Priester who was drafted where he was drafted, right? Like he's been a number 3 starter, you could say, this year for them with almost no developmental time with them. It's really, again, they're an organization that does a lot of things very well. But I would say that also with this is that even with making a couple of trades, their infield depth looks really interesting. And it also fits very well what this team likes to do. Like this is a team that loves athletic infielders, and then we'll figure out where to play them, which, by the way, they've also, Isaac Collins is going to go down in the best minor league Rule 5 picks of all time category. Pretty easily on that list. Again, athletic infielder, we'll make him a left fielder. He'll be really good at it. Okay. They play shortstops all around the infield. Bryce Terang can play shortstop. Joey Ortiz is a shortstop. Everyone they've thrown out this year at third base pretty much is at least semi shortstop capable. It's just really impressive what they've done. But then you've got like a guys again, like Luke Adams, Brady Ebel, Brock Wilkin, Andrew Fisher they just drafted. Like there's a lot of guys who play in the dirt who are intriguing in this list, in addition to the top guys. But I'll kick this to you. Our number 2, again, we say top heavies, top talent is important for us. Why are the Pirates number 2 in our farm system rankings?
Well, I think you look at this farm system, and particularly coming out of the draft as well, where I believe just from a BA grade, not factoring in risk, I think Seth Hernandez had the highest grade of any draftee at a 65 extreme. The upside's obviously there. You got a 70 high in Bubba Chandler, and you got a 70 high in Connor Griffin. And I got to be honest, we pushed that grade up to a 75 this offseason. I wouldn't shake my head, wouldn't scare me. Then you have one of the biggest prospect breakouts this season in the lower levels in Edward Florentino.
Top 100 prospect.
Top 100 prospect. And even behind that, and now there's some flaws in these guys. I think that's the same as it is with a lot of teams. They made some trades. They reinforced the depth in this system. And I look at this team now from spring training and all the backfield games I watched, so I got a really good grip on what the system was like. There's a lot of depth here now between the guys they drafted, between some of the guys they traded for. And there's some interesting names when you go from 21 to 30. Carlson Reed's back there, interesting arm. Valdez, who we saw in the futures game, has some interesting power. Teams were really high on Easton Carmichael as a catcher that could hit. We've heard positive things about Jack Brannigan, even recently, in terms of the defense, but some questions on whether he can hit. I talked to a couple of scouts about the Jeter Martinez acquisition. People are still really high on that one and feel as if there's just some maturity stuff that they can kind of get over.
Reliever, probably.
Yeah, probably a good reliever, but there's still arm speed and size and stuff there to believe in. And that's their 26th ranked prospect. And internally, I've heard some really good things on Axial Plaza, that there were some big advocates for him as a pretty good player. So I think, and he's a 50 extreme. He's a 50 extreme at 29. That is a really good system. So maybe there's better systems from 5 to 12.
There are.
And there aren't many systems better 1 through 4. And there's very few systems that have that 1 through 4 that also have that 21 to 30 depth. And I think that's one of the things that kind of brings them up in the rear a little bit, that they have these high-end guys. And maybe that, as we said, 5 to 12 isn't as good as some other teams, but from that 13 to 30, they're just as good, if not better. And there's a lot of legitimate prospects in the back end of this list, which wasn't the case with the Pirates 2 years ago. They've done a good job of acquiring some interesting players and getting more depth into that system. And they have some high-end pitchers, which they've had. They have high-end hitters for the first time in a really, really long time. Almost as long as I think I've been doing this.
The other thing I would say, though, is this, yes, it is very much about the top heaviness of this because they have Connor Griffin. Connor Griffin is our number one prospect in the game. And to what you just said, Geoff, like there is no position prospect in the minors right now who has kind of more possibilities for what they could become, right? Because we are talking about a 2024 first, reasonably high first round pick. But at that time, it was like he could be a shortstop, he could be a center fielder. We've talked about, we're worried about the hit tool. He is kind of one of those near unicorn athletes, right? Like no one's as unicorn as Ellie De La Cruz, for instance. However, when you talk about a guy like Connor Griffin could be, when we talk about the 5-tool player, right? Like 5-tool gets thrown around way too often, and usually it's thrown around on guys who it's like, no, if you are 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, you can call that a cheap 5-tool player if you want, but that's not a 5-tool player. 5-tool player is someone who you can say it's 6s across the board or better. Connor Griffin could be 6 hit, 6 power, 6 field, 6 run, 6 arm. And by the way, I know that there are several there that I've sold short by saying that it's a plus tool, because like his run tool, you'd have to tie an anchor to him for him to be a 6 runner. His arm, better than a 6 arm. Power should eventually be, could be better than 6 power. Field, depends on where you play him, but he could, if you put him in center field, he's going to be better than the 6 fielder.
He's a true 5-tool player where it's all 60s or better. Because I think the hit tool at this point, like the biggest strikeout numbers came in like the first 2 games of the season. And we talked about this a month and a half ago when he got promoted to high A. He's been running a sub 20% strikeout rate in high A too. With high walk rates, with good angles, with power. Every element of the hit tool is there to be a 6.
Okay. We're not going to cover everyone. If you want everyone, go to baseballamerica.com. We have all this here. But we are going to pick some teams that are interesting. The Dodgers rank 7th on our list. I would say that we go into this saying they have the best group of outfielders. Like they have, I would struggle to come up with another team that can match Jose De Paula, Zahir Hope, Mike Sirota, Eduardo Quintero. That's 4 Class A outfielders. A couple of them hurt. Mike Sirota's out for the rest of the year. Jose De Paula, last I checked, was still on the IL as well. However, that's a great group. They have 7 top 100 prospects. Dalton Rushing still qualifies for this by our standards. Alex Freeland's in the big leagues. Roki Sasaki still qualifies. We're hoping he gets back on the mound soon. Well, I know he's on the mound, but hopefully in games, I should say, soon. So I would say with this, though, like if you said, well, why then are they 7th? I think the key thing that's kind of worth noting here is a lot of this value, they do have, again, Dalton Rushing is up, although he doesn't look like he's anywhere close to being a regular for them in the big leagues right now. But Dalton Rushing is up. Alex Freeland is up, but again, this is the Dodgers, so it doesn't look like he's more of a kind of a role player. There's a lot of this tied into Class A players really good Class A players, really intriguing Class A, but Class A outfielders. And I think the other thing we'd say right now is healthy pitchers, healthy, successful pitchers in a system that's had a lot of those. That's kind of what's kind of I would say a little bit thinner right now, especially after they did make some trades at the deadline. They brought guys in, Adam Saranowski in. They got guys out. Eric Swan, Sean Lenian go out. So like they've done a little bit of both. But that's where I would say like they're like if you're comparing them to like the Mariners who are right ahead of them, I would say that there's where again every system has its flaws. But that would be my question probably with the Dodgers. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think you look at the Mariners and, they have a guy up top who's within that top 15. That's the difference between 19 for rushing or 18, 19 for rushing and DePaula and 22 at Hope. And a lot of these systems that rank ahead of them is they have multiple top 15 guys or like a top 5 guy. That's kind of what's pushing them ahead because we talked about what the value was in our previous conversation. The Dodgers, to me, kind of lack that. And I think that a bigger season by DePaula, he's had a very good year. And it's been a lot of positive development for him. But that like monster sort of season eluded him and Hope a little bit. I think that monster season would have pushed them into that conversation more securely.
Sirota was trying to have it, but he started the year in low A because of the outfield, and then he got hurt.
Sirota to me had to do it at Tulsa, right? Because granted, it was a small conference guy. He played in the Cape for 2 years, USA. Like he got all the opportunities. It wasn't like he was outside of that exposure funnel. He had a bad couple of months. It dropped his draft stock. He's had some nicks and bruises and injuries over the years, so this isn't totally shocking either. But he was a great development, and obviously this is what the Dodgers do well, in terms of evaluating their own system, other people's systems, and the amateur market, whether it's domestically or international. They do that just about as well as anybody. That's why they have great depth. I think this is a system. We were just talking about Pittsburgh. This is a system where they're like 5 to 12 is still really good. And that maybe even slides into like the 18, 19, 20 range, where there's guys like Zach Root and Charles Davelin that probably rank higher in a lot of other systems that are in the top half. So they have that going for them. I think you're right, though, about the healthy pitchers. They've always had some exciting arms. Even some of the guys that they drafted this year, Root is a good pitcher, but there's some questions about the stuff. So it's like, all right, where does that go? I think you look at Cam Leiter, who has phenomenal stuff, might have been a top 15 pick had he been healthy and actually pitched at FSU. But there's injury concerns there already walking in. And you see guys like James Tibbs, who's been traded twice in a year, regardless of how well he's hit out there. So there's some questions on some of these guys too, that I think the upside, from a sizzle perspective, this system has a lot of sizzle. If we ranked it as like the top 30 sexiest systems, maybe this ranks top 5. But I think when you put the context of some of the injuries and some of that stuff in, it does push them down a little bit for me.
So that leads us to a team that I wanted to talk about, which is, but when I say that we use a valuation system, we've been using the Driveline prospect valuation methodology in recent years pretty consistently. But there's a human factor to this as well. And with the human factor, we look at it as an organization, as a group, as a team, and we say like, this seems too high, this seems too low, and then we adjust. No team got adjusted more than the Mets. We moved them, their valuation was going to have them a little bit lower. And again, we also have variance. We try to even it out, but we have some people whose the way they use BA grades a little tougher than others. Looking at you, Geoff, so like there's some of that goes into this, so, but when we do that, we move the Mets up to 9. But if you ask me right now, which organization could we look back on and say we were probably still a little light on with these rankings? I would say the Mets might be it, and here's why. Now, I thought they did a great job at the deadline, and I know Mets fans are hearing this going, we did a great job at the deadline, and we've been terrible since. The Brewers have run away with it, all these things, right? But I thought they did a really good job at the deadline of trading what I would describe as manufactured talent, right? And that doesn't mean that they traded fabricated prospects who are going to fall apart or anything like that. But what I mean is they didn't trade first round picks where you're like, in most cases, I know, okay, Drew Gilbert,
Not theirs.
not theirs, but most of what they traded a lot of power arms who, when they signed with the Mets, were kind of dime a dozen type players who then got better and became interesting to other organizations. A lot of them relievery types,
Yeah.
but when you talk about the Ramon Gomez's or the Wellington Aracinas or the guys like that, and there's
Frank
a lot of those.
Ellisart. Yeah.
Yep.
Nate Dome's a little more startery, but sure.
A lot of these guys, they traded those guys, which I think that the Mets, because they have kind of developed their player development to be a little bit more of a powerhouse now, they're doing really good work there on the pitching side, especially. They view that as kind of a renewable resource. Okay, we bring in the next guys and then we can turn around and trade that. They held on to the top. And why I would say that I think they could be better than where we have them ranked at 9th potentially is all of our top prospects for them. Now, a lot of them were in Double A until this past week because they were just pushed a whole group up to Triple A. Now we know that Nolan McLean is coming up to the big leagues for Saturday to start. But they're all upper level guys who've had success in the upper levels of the minors. There's not one of these guys. Like Jonah Tong has been the most successful pitcher in the minors this year. Strikeouts, ERA, hits allowed, all that. And he was doing it at Double A at a very, not just an age appropriate, he's young for the level. We just talked about McLean's been really good at AAA. Brandon Sproat made some adjustments and just keeps getting better at AAA. Carson Bench has been arguably the best hitter in the upper minors, and he got promoted pretty early to AA. So they've got this group of guys who are knocking on the door. Like, we're seeing it here. They're cracking open the door with McLean. But if you told me, I think almost all of these guys, if there's a need, I would say you're probably the position pitchers especially. But if I'm the Mets and I need pitching in September, I wouldn't put Jonah Tong in my rotation right now. But if you said you're going to bring that guy in for an inning, he's a weird look that hitters are not used to seeing. And then you're done with him. You're like, okay, you're not seeing, he will not face a guy. Like, again, you could pick your spots from right now and say, like, he's never going to face a hitter in a series twice. It's going to be a tough guy that would be a tough guy to deal with. Sproat could absolutely fit in their pen right now, I think, and be potentially useful. I think that I want to get what you think, but I think that this is a system that, again, the amount of upper level has already cleared the Double A and in many cases the Triple A hurdle, puts them in really good stead. These are all guys who have real talent too. It's not like they're gritty guys who just don't really have a whole lot of tools to go with it.
Yeah, I think you look at the pitchers and you've kind of gone through it. I think McLean and Sproat seem like fairly fully baked major league starters at this point. A little older on Sproat's part, but they've done a really good job of optimizing these guys, optimizing their pitch mixes. Like, I don't know, how much of that has been, Eric Jager's influence that he's been in the organization for a couple of years, but it did seem like when they hired him, a lot of the development kind of got some serious horsepower in terms of what we saw from the outputs, etc. It seems like they've done a really good job on the hitting side as well, that there's a lot of hitting prospects that have come into their own. Guys like Carson Bench, who's very tooled up, was a two-way guy at Oklahoma State. Now that he's committed full-time to hitting, is one of the biggest breakout prospects in the minors this year. He's been phenomenal. It's been a huge bounce back year for Jet Williams after an injury-plagued 2024. He's really showing sort of that dynamic leadoff skill set that we had anticipated he would. Lots of walks, Maybe he's not the fastest guy in the bases, but he's a good base stealer. He's got a little bit of power as well. And, that approach and everything drives him. He can play some shortstop. He can play some center field. He's a really versatile player. And I think a winning ball player, a guy that is going to go into that organization and, immediately is going to fit in and fill a valuable role for them. And I think Ryan Clifford is really interesting. There's huge power here. He's been a big name since he was 13 years old, with USA Baseball and all that sort of stuff. I think people knew Gilbert better when that deal was made, but as somebody who was doing the Astros at the time, internally, those Astros folks were kind of cringing over trading Clifford. That was the one they didn't want to include in that deal for Verlander. He's the one that stuck around. It's a true three true outcome kind of profile. He's not the athlete that Spencer Jones is. He's probably a little bit better contact hitter. The approach is better. And it maybe isn't 80 power like Jones, but it's probably 70 power with pretty good angles. He's a guy that I could see being a really good 6 hitter. Maybe the batting average is 230-ish, but it's walking 12% of the time. And in his peak could be a 25 to 30 home run kind of guy, while still playing a corner outfield spot and filling in at first base when you need it. He's not a bad player. So I think you look at this whole group of guys. We talked about Tong. McLean's coming up this week. This was the most talented AA team in the world. It's now the most talented AAA team in the world. Sorry, Iowa Cubs. They have overtaken you now. This is a loaded roster. Even with McLean leaving, this is a loaded roster.
So to keep just rolling along, now we're getting more to the middle. If you said what team, I think that for both of us really jumps out in the middle here. The Giants farm system, still a good ways away in a lot of cases, but there's more kind of bubbling up at the lower levels of the system than we've seen from them in quite a while. And they we don't want to say, like, Bryce Eldridge is their number one prospect. He's back mashing in AAA. And as we've noted, defensively, still not great, but better, which again, I would hope so, because 18 errors for a first baseman last year is that gets you a needs improvement on your offseason training report. Like, you cannot get 18 errors from a first baseman and be okay with that. But he's gotten better. But I would say that more, Geoff, of what kind of jumps out and makes us really intrigued is what's kind of, in some cases, still in the complexes. Or at least was until very recently, I should say, in some cases.
Yeah, well, I think you look at Josuar Gonzalez. He feels like the kind of guy who, on the top 100 right now, we were aggressive with him, but he's the type where at like 85, a year from now, we might look back on this last, end of year list or whatever and be like, he maybe should have been in top 30. Like, he has that kind of upside. So he's a player that you can get pretty excited about. There's big upside there, arguably the best player in the DSL this year. And kudos to Josh Norris for being on top of that very early. It's why we love Josh and all the work that he does in the complexes.
I mean, Josh has seen him in person.
He has. Johnny Level is another one that we got really good reporting on. Very highly ranked in Josh's ACL rankings. He's now at San Jose in a full season. Josh saw him last night again. He's a really exciting player and maybe a top 100 adjacent kind of guy. In between those two, you have Bo Davidson, who found his way onto the top 100 list here at 88. He's a really well-rounded prospect and maybe somebody that was a little bit underrated as a non-drafted free agent. There's not a lot of...
Yeah, when you say a little bit underrated,
yeah,
the draft rolled around and everyone said, nah, we're good. And here he is as a top 100 prospect. I would put it that is a developmental, a scouting and developmental home run.
100%. Carson Wisenhunt between them, a guy that's in the big leagues now, getting some starts for that team. And then we start to look at some of the guys they acquired, both in the draft and via trade. Guys like Gavin Keelan, one of my favorite college hitters in the draft. He took a massive step forward with the power and approach this year. He went from kind of a contact guy who looked to put the ball in play to a guy with really well-rounded approach, with great bat-to-ball skills, and better power and angles than he had ever had previously in his career. I don't think he's like a 25 homer guy or anything like that, but could probably hit 15 with a really good average, maybe a leadoff or a number 2 hitter type for you. Blade Tidwell will be interesting to see what he becomes, probably a reliever, but an interesting name. And then I think you start to go down into some of the guys that you did talk about, other complex guys. They have a couple of complex league pitchers here and, that aren't on the complex any longer. And Kayama, right-hander who's really interesting. I wrote about him earlier in the year. And then Luis De La Torre, undersized lefty, who's been really good as well. It's an interesting system. The depth isn't crazy, but it's also not bad. There's a lot of major leaguers within this back end group. And, a couple of bright spots and the upside guys that, we're still catching up on. So overall, it's a pretty exciting group. There's a lot of lower level guys that there's always some risk with those. But just based on where they ranked, and I dug in, I was kind of like, really, the Giants are ranked that high? And then I started to go into player by player, and you're kind of doing your analysis in your head, and you're like, all right, yeah, no, that makes sense. So it was one of those where I was a little shocked and surprised. But then when I did the research and kind of the evaluation, it was like, all right, this makes sense.
Insert meme here. Like where you start and then you get to the point where like, yeah, okay.
100%. It's exactly what it is.
Okay. So this one I'm just putting back in your court. Now we are getting back to the very back of this list. And we have the Astros sitting here at 28. That's pretty low.
Yeah.
They don't have a top 100 prospect. But I want to ask the question this way, because I will say, like, there are times where we've had teams at the back where, like, there's just nothing here. Them and the Braves, 28 and 29. I don't hate these systems. There's some things here to be interested in. Like, this is not like, we'll get to the Padres in a minute, but this is not where you look around and you're like, wow, this runs out really fast. Are we selling a little short? I just say from the standpoint of like, I feel like that the Astros do a good job of maximizing what they have a lot of times.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's been a theme with them over the years, because this hasn't been a good system as long as I've been at BA, dating back to 2021. But there's always guys that by the time they're ready to go up to the big leagues, we're like, maybe we're a little lower on them than we should have been. It hasn't happened as much in the last couple of years, and I think I've done a good job of being on some of the breakouts, like Jake Bloss a couple of years ago. This year, Kevin Alvarez in the complex, Bryce Meyer kind of out of the draft, Joseph Sullivan out of the draft, well sourced within the organization. So I always feel really good about how my list lines up. But what the Astros need is they honestly need a couple of guys to really blow up. The one I'm looking at in particular is Xavier Nyans, which he was as divisive as a prospect as you got among the top high school hitters in this class. There is a wide range of opinions on his hit tool. Nobody questions the power. Left-handed power, bigger body. When I look at Nyans, it's a Roman Anthony starter kit. Similar questions to what Roman Anthony had when he came into pro ball. Our amateur guys, like when he first came in and the hit tool numbers, if you remember, in Salem were pretty dang good. It was like, where did this come from? He wasn't a great contact hitter. There's swing and miss in the circuit, yada, yada, yada. I don't know if it was as strong as Nyans' swing and miss issues were, but I think there's some things there that Nyans, when I speak with them internally, they kind of look at it as it's risky. This guy could either be one of the best prospects in baseball or a guy that constantly teases you with tools but never really puts it all together. The other one that I think they have to bank on is Kevin Alvarez. Alvarez was a big bonus signing for them. He's in the Dominican Summer League. He's athletic. He's twitchy. He's a bigger guy that can play center field. Left-handed hitter with potential above average power and above average hitting ability. Those are two guys next year in full season ball that if the offseason work, and we always talk about this now, the shutdown periods in terms of when the minor league season ends to when these guys actually get on the field, which is between, let's say, mid-September and, mid-March in terms of when we actually see them in backfield games. There's a lot of growth that can happen, particularly with focused swing work and all those things. And the Astros have typically done a pretty good job of that. If both of those guys come out and have big years, this system will make a pretty substantial jump, because I do think those guys have massive upside. But it's not great when you're banking on guys like that to rise your system up, because you don't really have a lot of impact players. They may have one of the best groups of 45 highs. That's kind of where the system's strength is, but you're not going to rank very high with 24 really good 45 highs. You're just not.
Because by our nature, by our definition, a 45 high makes you a top 500 to 1,000 prospect in the game.
Yeah.
So you can have a lot of the 500 to 1,000 prospects in the game. It doesn't make up for how many of the top 20 prospects? 0. Okay. What about 50? 0. Okay. Yeah. Like quantity of, well, this guy's in the top 750 isn't going to make up for it in how we do this when we do our farm system rankings. But speaking of that, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised to know that the Padres are our number 30. I will say with this, the very top of this system remains intriguing. If you said they're not going to have anything to trade next year, they'll have things to trade if they want to before the draft next year. They don't have to wait for the draft. They don't have to trade their next big international signee, in 2026. Cruz Schoolcraft, Miguel Mendez, Ethan Salas, if he can get back and healthy and start hitting. These are still very intriguing prospects. But what does stand out with the Padres? And this is, they come by this honestly. The depth of this system now is barren. And that is because if you are trading anything that's not nailed down, which they did at the deadline again, and you approach your draft and international, which by the way is working for them in a lot of ways. But like, if you kind of say, we're going to go after this high ceiling player and we're going to make our international class built around this player, which they've done. And by the way, Leo DeVries, Ethan Salas, it's worked out when they've done that. But when you do that and you say, well, what is the rest of the class? Like, oh, there's not much else in the class. Or when you say in the draft, hey, we're going to shift money so that we can pay a Cruz Schoolcraft, when you're trading off to do that, where I would say is like, when you said like, okay, the Dodgers from 5 to 12 are really good, or the Pirates from 12 to 30 are really good. Having to update the top 30 for this Padres list after they traded away, like they traded 6 prospects in the Ramon Laureano, Ryan O'Hearn deal. Some of those were not top 30 prospects. But when you look around, you're like, oh, I think I had 9 or 10 guys that I had to replace. And you're reaching out to scouts, and it's like, is there anyone? Am I missing someone and all that? And I will just be honest with you. I wrote up org players. There are players at the back of that list who are 100%. Ryan Jackson, who was at Southern Cal, is the prototypical college middle infielder, senior sign. College middle infielder, does a lot of things reasonably well, not particularly tooled up, not going to be a big league everyday shortstop, anything like that. The kind of guy who it wouldn't shock you in any way if he made the big leagues. If you told me that he got 15 games or 20 games or something like that. But there's also a decent chance that he's just a really good Midwest League player for the next, he's the guy you keep around to help the other guys, as they kind of acclimate and all that. That in most systems, guys like that aren't top 30 prospects. In the Padres list, they are definitely top 30 prospects now. Any Padres thoughts that you have?
No, I think that's all accurate. And another system, though, where there might be a couple of guys lurking from this draft class who a year from now we're talking about a little differently. They do a good job of evaluating amateurs, maybe as good as anybody. That's kind of AJ Preller's prime ability above all. That's a superpower. So they always do well there.
But so that is our look at the farm system rankings. You can check out the full list over at baseballamerica.com, and we have written write-ups on all that. And by the way, you also have the full top 30s, updated top 30 prospect rankings for all 30 organizations, and the updated top 100. In addition to, we also have draft rankings, college. We just updated the college top 100 for next year and things like that. But as we always do before we wrap up here, we apologize that we're doing this a day late, but I hope that we made up for it with what we're talking about here. But as we always do, Geoff, we end with the prospect soapboxes. And I know that you've been raring to go on this one, because I know that this is something that I think you have a story also coming out at baseballamerica.com.
Yes.
I will remind you on this, as always, prospect soapboxes are prospects who are not top 100 prospects. That is the key thing here. So
yes.
Take it
so
away.
I'll go into my prospect soapbox here. Not a top 100 prospect at all, but I think one of the better stories that I've heard in my time covering the minor leagues and talking to players. There's an article up on Baseball America this morning, kind of diving into this a little bit more, but I want to talk about Red Sox right-handed pitching prospect Tyler Uberstein. He has an absolutely unbelievable story. So he went to Chaminade in California, which is I think, one of the top schools in CIF. Like, they compete within the division with Harvard, Westlake, and all those. So it's difficult to get on those teams. Didn't make his freshman team. Was cut straight up. Played freshman as a sophomore. Played JV as a junior. Was put on the varsity team as a senior and pitched a total of under, I think it was 7 1/3 innings in high school. It's under 10 innings. Didn't get any offers, obviously, because of this. He had been sending out videos and, applying to a bunch of different schools, had a great grade point average, really high SAT, so he could get into those Ivies and those sort of high-end schools. No one comes calling back. He figures his baseball career is over. He enrolls at USC as a business major, has a couple of roommates his freshman year who are former baseball players, big sports guys. They say, hey, why don't we practice and we'll go try out for the club team? And I find this part of the story to be remarkable. I won't tell you where they are because it's going to be part of the story. And you guys, I want you to read it. But they went and found a space to practice at night that wasn't next to the D1 field because they were embarrassed to practice pitching and doing all these things around a bunch of D1 guys. So they try out for the club team. He ends up getting cut by the club team. And this lights a fire underneath, Tyler and in his belly. And so he says, you know what? I'm going to lean into this. I'm going to work as hard as I can. And I'm going to try out for USC's varsity team next year. All right. So he does that. He commits to this. He goes to a training facility where he Ubers to the training facility 4 to 5 times a week from campus in order for him to throw and train. He goes from sitting in the high 70s to like low to mid 80s. Okay. Shows up to USC. He actually reaches out to the head coach at the time, says, hey, can I try out? Can I try to walk on at USC? He says, sure, have at it. So he does that. He goes to the training, shows up. This is the first time in his life where he's on a real regimented throwing program with USC throughout the winter. So he's throwing, he's 83 to 85. The next week, he's 84 to 86. The week after that, he's 85 to 87. Finally, he's more like 86 to 88 the final week before, the final cut downs. He's up to 90 in games. Okay. He goes through media day. He gets his custom glove from USC. He thinks he's on the team. 3 days before the season start, he's told that he's cut from USC. Doesn't make it. Okay. This guy effectively hasn't pitched in 6 years, right? There are guys that throw more innings in a game than this guy has thrown in the last 6 years. He doesn't give up the dream. He loves baseball that much. He puts in more work and he says, I'm going to make him pay. Ends up getting an offer to go to Northwestern. I don't believe it was on scholarship. He paid his way, just said, give me an opportunity to go there. 2020 happens. So he gets a few starts, makes a really good start against South Carolina that maybe gets him on the radar for some guys. Season shut down. Next year, Northwestern's one of these schools, a lot like the Ivies and the higher education schools. They had a lower tolerance for testing, et cetera, during that COVID bounce back year in 2021. If we all remember, we would plan to go to games and then they would get shut down 4 or 5 hours ahead of time. He also contracts mono that season, so he misses some more time. I mean, like every hurdle this guy could get, he gets. There's a scout with the Red Sox, their area guy up there, Alonzo Wright, sees this start from South Carolina when he's working some video stuff during 2020 and 21. He says, I like this kid. They do some Zoom meetings with a bunch of prospects around the area. This is a very common practice for area scouts to get to know all the kids. Here's Tyler's story. He says, I love this kid. This kid has stones. I believe in this guy. So Tyler doesn't think he's going to get drafted. He's telling teams, I will sign as an NDFA. Just give me an opportunity. All I want is just get me in the boat. Here's his name called in the 19th round. Here's from, here's from Zoe. Alonzo calls him. They're both excited. He gets his opportunity. He knows he's going into this as a guy that is just there to play catch with the other guys, right? There's certain guys that sign. They know they're not priority. They're not going to be a guy that's going to get pushed up. Has a great year in 2022 across the A-ball levels. He's jacked up. He goes into the offseason. He really, like, for the first time in his life, he's adding on to his velocity. He's 93 to 95. He adds a sinker. He's got a new slider. He takes that step forward. Last game of minor league spring training, he yanks a changeup and he feels a twinge in his elbow. And he knows it. He's like, I'm hurt. Comes out of the game. Everything he thought he was going into that year, his big sort of platform year, he's hurt. They wait to do the surgery. He doesn't get cut until May or June of the next year. He effectively misses 2 years, okay? His last official start was August 26, 2022. He returns to a mound in August 2024 on August 23rd. Almost a year to the day, comes back, goes to the Arizona Fall League, performs pretty well. He's once again thinking, I'm probably headed back to high A Greenville. He ends up getting assigned to Portland and is their opening day starter. And for him, it was like a big deal. I'm an opening day starter. I'm gonna push it. I'm gonna make guys recognize who I am. Pitches pretty well, gets promoted up to Worcester, not because he pitched so well, but because other guys were hurt, other guys were getting promoted, and they don't want to mess with some of the other prospects. So he gets that opportunity, right? He's shoved in AAA. I mean, he pitched last night against Iowa. The only guy that was on him was Owen Casey. All the runs pretty much came off of Owen Casey's bat. I think we both agree that he's a guy that should be in the major leagues right now. But over 13 appearances with Worcester, spanning 61 and 2/3 innings. He's got a 3.50 ERA in a place that's not easy to pitch. He's got a 2% K rate. He's got an 8.4% walk rate. And, he's consistently taking the ball in a variety. You want to throw him in relief. You want to throw him as a middle inning guy, or you want to piggyback him with Kyle Harrison. He's cool. Do whatever you want. He's ready to go. I just think this is, and as somebody who didn't get a job working for BA until I was 39 years old, this was a late dream for me. I love guys like this because this dude loves baseball like I love baseball. Like, he should have quit 5 times. He should have quit after high school. He should have quit when he got cut by his club team. He should have quit when USC cut him, right? He should have quit after 2020. There was, surgeries, mono, all these hurdles that he had to overcome. Coaches not believing in him. He showed up every day. He kept working, and now he's on the cusp of the major leagues. And I think, based on the performance and the type of stuff we're seeing here, if he's not called up or protected this offseason, it wouldn't be shocking if this guy gets drafted in the Rule 5 draft, because he's kind of one of those stories. And I think if you dig into the story, he might be 26. He's 21 in baseball years. There's 5 or 6 years. There's a lot of growth and development that happens for guys that perform earlier at 17, 19, 20, 21 that he had to do on his own to even get to that foundational point. So I think that just shows, I think it's one of the best stories I've ever heard. And I've shared it with my parents. I've shared it with my wife. And I think it could be a movie. I mean, this is great stuff. It's like Cam Boozer, but in a different sort of way.
That's awesome. It makes me think of Daniel Nava, who's always, the story that I've told.
It was Daniel Nava. And honestly, I talked to him for 40 minutes earlier this week. And then we were texting after. And in my head, I was like, this is going to be my Chris Colabello. Like, this is the guy that like JJ fell in love with and, indie ball, that he followed his career and has just always been an advocate. And then I was talking to Alonzo right afterward and saying, like, what did you see that nobody else saw? Because there were so many people that didn't see it with this guy, and you saw it. And that's what's great about scouting. It's what's great about baseball, that, you know, this guy, you don't have stories like this in the NBA. You have very few stories like this in the NFL or the NHL. You know, this is kind of unique to baseball.
That's awesome. Well, mine's going to be a little bit more straightforward, my prospect soapbox. I would say that if you look at one of the things, again, this is, we didn't talk about the Orioles in our farm system rankings, but it's been a very interesting year, because I would say that the Orioles 2025 season is one that everyone's going to want to forget, understandably. This is a team that at the big league level is the biggest underachiever in baseball, probably in 2025. But in the minors, in the farm system, there are some interesting things that have happened. A couple of guys we did add to the top 100. We've added actually multiple guys to the back of the top 100 in recent months, including the additions in this most recent top 100 prospects update. Check that out at baseballamerica.com. Prospect is not close to that yet, but if Nate George is 100% the best late round pick that the Orioles had last year, and the best late round pick that anyone had last year, most likely, kind of a high school guy out of Illinois who, you know, when you get a guy who was drafted after they like the talent, he was drafted in the, you know, if you draft him in the top 10 rounds and you don't sign him, you lose the money. If you draft in the 11th round on and you find the money to sign him, then there's less risk if a player doesn't sign, high school player. But the other guy that you should also pay attention to, who was addition to our top 30 for the Orioles, is their 12th round pick last year, Andrew Tess, athletic catcher out of Clearwater, Florida. He wasn't Nate George in the FCL, because no one else was Nate George in the FCL, I will say. But he was really impressive and really intriguing for a young athletic catcher who's still a teenager, who's now been bumped up to low A. It's a name to keep an eye on. Like the all of a sudden, the Orioles are really deep in catching. Because, by the way, so they have Caden Bodine they drafted. Ike Irish, they plan on catching some, in addition to him playing all kind of around. But they do plan on him catching some in addition to that. They obviously have Samuel Basayo. This is all behind Adley Rushman at the big league level. And they now have Andrew Tess, who's kind of an intriguing athletic catcher. I would say he is very far away. Like, he's got a strong arm, but the accuracy is not always there when he's throwing. He has a really good body. You really like what you kind of see from him, what he could be offensively. He's got an understanding. If he gets plunked a lot, his OBP is a little bit, I would describe it as artificially high for now because of that. But you put it all together, and it's really intriguing and a worthwhile guy, especially for a guy who was a 12th round pick in 2024. So that's my soapbox of the day. We covered a lot today, Geoff. You know, it was fun. It's always fun to do this. But we hope you enjoyed this. If you did, check out all that stuff that we have over at baseballamerica.com. As we always like to do, thank you to the BA subscribers, because you all are what allows us to do what we do. Speaking of, like we said, Josh Norris is out there seeing Johnny Level right now. Josh Norris and Carlos Collazo were just out at area code games seeing the top high school prospects in next year's draft class, which looks like a really intriguing draft class. You know, we have, Jesus Cano is out at Bridge League and Continuation League. And if you don't know why I said Bridge League and Continuation League, I would recommend that you check out Jesus's story from earlier this week at baseballamerica.com, or last week, I should say, that explains why it is. There are actually two leagues out there. There's the Bridge League and the Continuation League, and he explains the differences and all that over at baseballamerica.com. For Geoff, I'm JJ. So long, everybody.